Hello again, guys, what is up? This is Comic Kid here again, and today we will be discussing Hasbro's Marvel Legends versus McFarlane's DC Multiverse. Now, a while back I did a Mattel vs. McFarlane Wave review, and I mentioned a few notable differences between both of those companies and Hasbro, and so I really kind of wanted to show some of the differences between the two current toy companies. Now, on the left here, we have the Hasbro Marvel Legends Vintage Series Captain America. And I picked this one just because it's a pretty standard design for your average Hasbro Marvel Legend figure. It's not like the standard buck for the Legends or anything, but he's got a lot of the base components that, generally speaking, the other Hasbro Marvel Legends do as well. And then I decided to go with the Batman from McFarlane for the exact same reason. Now, right off the bat, you guys will notice a lot of differences between like some of the base sculpt. The McFarlane ones are taller. The Hasbro Marvel Legends one clock in at around 6 inches or so, and McFarlane's is a bit closer to 7. And that did make a lot of people mad at McFarlane, just because they inherited the 6-inch line from Mattel and then didn't do anything with it, and a lot of people generally prefer the 6-inch ones to the slightly taller ones in general. But McFarlane does scale more so with the like Diamond Select or DC Essentials figures than the actual Hasbro Legends ones do. Now, aside from being taller, you'll definitely notice a difference in like sculpt as well. Hasbro's been doing this much longer than McFarlane has, and so you can see the proportions on their Captain America are a lot more even, a lot more realistic looking, and so there's that. And then if you look at McFarlane, like Batman's shoulders are just very like broad, and part of that is due to the rubber goods cape, but I mean the head's a little small, wide torso, everything else seems pretty fine, and it's a pretty solid go for McFarlane's first attempt, but they definitely still have a few kinks to work out. Some of the other more obvious details, McFarlane has a ball joint in their wrist and their ankle figures, whereas Hasbro does not, but they do still have a good range of motion in the ankles for their figures, and I actually really like whatever the design for that mechanism is down there. McFarlane does have a plus in their wrists because the Hasbro ones can only go back and forth like that, and so with the McFarlane stuff you can get basically any wrist pose that you'd like, so that is one advantage that they have there. You'll also notice that they both have double jointed knees, and Hasbro also has this additional swivel kind of right at the upper thigh there. McFarlane does not have that, but that hip joint does allow for a little bit of swivel as well. It's definitely not as dynamic in range as the Legends one, but this can also only go up and out, and the swivel is there. So, as far as the leg articulation goes, I would say Hasbro probably has McFarlane beat in this case. Especially when it comes to the ankles and those joints there. A, they can hide that joint in the ankles much better, and B, that swivel right there just allows for much more range of motion. With that in mind, I do like how McFarlane uses that hard plastic piece to hide that joint there. With the Captain America one, you can definitely see that, and sometimes that like hip piece there can just look a little awkward. I think it looks fine on the Captain America, but every so often you get one where you're like, I don't know about that. Both of them have a hip swivel. My Captain America one is just very stiff. Both of them have an ab crunch. Depending on the figure, sometimes you get a bit more range in ab crunch, sometimes you don't. It really just kind of depends. Both of them do have double jointed elbows as well. And then one thing I like that McFarlane seems to be doing more of is the butterfly shoulder joint in there. It seems to be a lot more of a standard piece for McFarlane than it is for Hasbro. And again, that's not to say that like Hasbro doesn't have butterfly shoulders on any of their figures. I thought about using my Marvel Legends Pizza Spider-Man, but most Hasbro figures, at least for the ones that I have, don't have a butterfly shoulder joint, and I do have quite a lot. So aside from like the shoulders and whatnot, I'd probably give the torso piece to McFarlane. Don't get me wrong, there's still a few kinks to work out, and Hasbro definitely has the better shoulder joints when they do, but as far as like the standard goes, McFarlane is slightly more posable in the top half of their figures. Now, as far as like the head sculpts go, as always, like sometimes you have a bit more range, kind of depending. My Captain America head hardly moves at all. I don't mind that much. Like I said, sometimes they have more, sometimes they don't. Captain America doesn't really need to be looking up or down, at least the way that I generally have him posed. It's not normally like this. But no matter what, it's gonna kind of depend on the character sometimes. Now, as far as paint goes, every so often you run across a Hasbro figure that just has a really bad paint job, but for the most part, they've got it down to a pretty exact science. My Captain America does have a little bit of excess blue on some of the white areas up top. His star is a little faded, but it's not a huge deal. And then my McFarlane one, his face could use a few touch-ups. I wish the black on his symbol matched the rest of his suit a little bit better. And then I think there were some yellow marks from the belt, like on the backside, but nothing really noticeable. And so as far as paint goes, I'd say, like, in general, they're pretty evenly matched. If anything, I've noticed other people say that McFarlane is generally a little sloppier. I've definitely seen some bad paint jobs on some of their figures that just people have posted online. But I've definitely seen a lot of the same stuff from Hasbro as well. Granted, Hasbro has been doing this longer, you don't notice it a lot anymore, but when they first acquired the license, they definitely had a few kinks to work out as well. Now, as far as my general opinion between the two goes, I do think that Hasbro is the stronger maker of the two, at least for the time being. Granted, McFarlane only has one wave out at the moment, really, and they definitely still have a long ways to go. That being said, for their first go, I think they show a lot of promise. I've seen a lot of people give them hate. I don't quite understand where all that's coming from. And while I do think Hasbro is the stronger maker of the two at the moment, I think once McFarlane really kind of finds their footing with their DC line, they might actually be better in the long term. And don't get me wrong, I have so many Marvel Legends figures, it's not even funny. And I'm always going to be a fan of everything Hasbro has put out, but I do think McFarlane is a pretty valid contender. While they may be lacking at the moment, they definitely show promise. At the same time, these figures do both retail for around $20 to $25, depending on where you go. And so, technically you get more plastic with McFarlane, but as far as like quality and overall sculpt articulation, I would say Hasbro has the definitive lead for the time being, at least. But that is it for today, you guys. Thank you all so much for watching. Feel free to click like and subscribe, and I will see you guys again real soon.